Okay, so in just a moment I'm going to have our speakers come up. They are Beth Davenport and Bridget Hines. Beth Davenport, who directed the film, has worked in various capacities at Big Mouth Films since 2003. She brings more than 8 years of production and outreach experience in television, commercials, and award-winning documentaries for POV, Sundance Channel, BBC, and Arte France, as well as directing advocacy videos and short films. Her film credits include the Emmy-nominated film Deadline, Thomas Balm's Wrongful Death, and Election Day. Beth is currently a producer at Arts Engine Big Mouth Films and is producing Asexuality, The Making of a Movement, directed by Angela Tucker. Beth was a mentor for the IFP documentary Rough Cut Lab for 3 years and is a New York Foundation for the Arts Fellow. She graduated with a degree in Sociology and Peace and Conflict Resolution from Wayne State University. Bridget Hines is currently a visiting professor of politics at Marlborough College. She received her PhD from the University of Denver and has served as an ethnographer with the Colorado Foundation for Families and Children, a program evaluator with the Latin American Research and Service Agency Community Action Program in Denver, and as a human rights observer for communities of returning refugees in Guatemala. She has additional field experience in South Africa, Namibia, Angola, and Sierra Leone. Bridget also holds a graduate peace research certificate from the Peace Research Institute of the University of Oslo and an advanced graduate certificate in conflict studies from European Peace University in Spain. Her research examines the intersection of local communities' experiences with human rights, conflict, development, anthropology, and poverty economics.
I should congratulate you. It was such a beautiful film. From my perspective as someone engaged in African politics and concerned about issues related to African women in politics, I feel like it's a very timely piece because all over the continent we see movements of women's groups working very hard on the platform of peace. And so this is very timely in that sense. And it also shows very much, although Rose's children in many ways are lucky, I think, among Congolese children who many times suffer much more dire fates, forced inextensive child soldiering. Any of those little boys could have been involved in that, and sex camps and et cetera are very common in the Congolese conflict. But I really love the way that the film shows both the suffering of people, of war refugees as they resettle, and yet also the resilience and the possibility for what they can give back to the communities they came from. So I was wondering if you might just share with us a little bit about how you came to the story.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for being here tonight as well, and thank all of you. Big thanks to Brattleboro Museum and Independent Lens, where the film aired. So I work at Arts Engine Big Mouth Films, which is a production company in New York City. And I love Brattleboro, so I was very excited to see the film was screening here, because any excuse to get me to Brattleboro is a good excuse to me. So we do many things there, but one thing that we really strive to do when making social issue documentaries is look for an intimate story that can sort of tell a narrative and keep audiences engaged, that can shed light on larger issues, whether it be women's empowerment or peace and reconciliation or refugee rights. So we're actually not looking for a film about any of these things. We were researching subjects for films, in particular social entrepreneurs, and we met Sasha Chanoff, who was inspired after meeting Rose in a refugee camp and hearing of her story about naming her twins after the commanders who killed her husband in an act of forgiveness, to pull every string possible to get Rose and her then 9 children resettled to the US. And he told us Rose's amazing story, and we thought, wow, my co-director and I, this is quite some story, but what is that? What are people going to want to see for an hour and a half or an hour? And Sasha said, well, I don't know if this is interesting to you, but Rose was resettled here with 9 of her children, and she was separated from a 10th child, who she's now going to be reunited with. And we said, oh, that's it. That's the universal point of access that everyone can relate to. And we said, so when is the reunion? And he said, about a week and a half. And we said, And this became one of the crazier week and a halves in my life. But we were able to get a little startup money, and basically we filmed with Nangabire. I didn't, but we had a crew film with Nangabire. And then our first shoot day was with their reunion. So it was amazing.
The other thing that comes to mind when I think of the Congo, I think of a nation that was founded on violence and the very dictatorial pilfering of King Leopold. If anyone has the opportunity, I'd very much recommend King Leopold's Ghost to give you some idea of the social dynamics that came out of the founding of the Congo and how those still play out today. The forced recruitment of children was first happening under Leopold. The infamous sort of cutting off of hands is another thing that comes from Leopold's era. And then the very much extensive pillage of the national economy by Leopold to pull the resources out of the country, which was continued then later under Mobutu, who was installed after the assassination of the first president of the country, Patrice Lumumba, with some help from the CIA. Anyway, the idea that comes together for me is that this war was a continuation of that sort of tradition, let's say, of very much brutal extraction. And with 7 nations in the region at one point involved in this conflict, and so much happening along those lines, I think that while the story about reconciliation and forgiveness is very beautiful, I also feel very much like it's one that you have to be extraordinarily concerned about how you could make happen. And I wondered, is that how you came to the title Pushing the Elephant? Or what were your thoughts in titling the film, and some of your bigger thoughts on the Congolese crisis, maybe?
Yeah, well, we knew not only did we want to tell the film in the words of Rose and her family, which is why we didn't use a voiceover, or, we really tried to let it, in a perfect world, Rose could make this film, but that's not a perfect world yet. So Rose says in the film, one person alone can't push an elephant, but together many people can. So we thought that it was a great title to sort of show activism and trying to bring peace. One thing that we're really committed to at Arts Engine is the fact that when a film is done, it's just the beginning for us. And we've been engaged for about a year in a really long audience engagement campaign where we've taken the film to Washington, D.C. There was an act called the International Violence Against Women Act that unfortunately still hasn't passed, but it's for the first time the government, it was proposed that the government would prioritize women in conflict areas. And so we took Rose in the film there, and we're able to get 2 co-signers, 2 Congresspeople to co-sign the bill, and unfortunately it's been tabled now. All that to say that you're completely right. The Congo is not just about ethnic conflict. It's about resources. There's one of the biggest resource fiascos that's happening right now is coltan, which is the mineral that's used to make our cell phones, Sony PlayStation, and this has been dubbed a conflict mineral, and there are many reasons why many governments are not intervening in Congo because it's benefiting the cost of this mineral. It comes out at a lower price. So I would like to give everyone in the audience an opportunity. There are some organizations that actually do great work on conflict mineral activism. One is the Enough Project. They have a program called Raise Hope for Congo. You can go there, you can sign petitions to prioritize conflict-free minerals coming into the US. And you can also research the International Violence Against Women Act. And we also like to say that one big and very tangible way that people can help is by finding out if you have a local refugee resettlement organization and see if they need any volunteers. They always do. And it could be as simple as bringing a box of clothes there to taking someone to the grocery store. So.
Yeah. I would just share some personal experiences. My family and I were first friends to 3 Sudanese families who came to the States and followed one woman who became pregnant on her arrival here through the birth of her child, and just have had some amazing experiences seeing our culture through the eyes of someone who's here for the first time, who's maybe never ridden in an elevator before. At that time I lived on the 4th floor in Denver in an apartment, and or been to Costco or a Target or one of these type of enormous places, and to have that experience and act as a guide and someone who can help someone find their way through our culture and our society is very powerful. At the same time as I feel like my family grasped a lot of perspective and a sense of being able to be joyful even in the face of calamity. Now, losing a sneaker doesn't bring tears as easily when you think of, oh gosh, those guys lost their home or something like that. So I'd recommend that experience to anyone. It was a very powerful one in my life.
One thing I could also comment on, you mentioned that the film not only portrays some of the horrors that happened, but also the resilience and, in fact, joy that Rose and her family experienced. And I mean, this was so palpable the minute after we filmed the reunion, which actually happened in a New York airport just because of how connections happen. I hopped on a plane and went home for the first time with Nangabire and the family. And the minute you step in the doors of the Mapendo household, there is singing and laughter and kids just having the time of their lives. Mm-hmm. And I think that it's a big testament to how Rose has chosen to free herself by embracing forgiveness and pass it along to her children. They obviously still suffer from the past, mm-hmm. but they also have this amazing capacity for joy. And ultimately, the message that we wanted people to take away from the film was hope. Like, we can do something. We can be a part of change, not just reveling in sort of the depression of how bad things can get.
Yeah, absolutely.
Beth, a question. I'm shocked to hear that your first minute on the scene was at reunion at the airport. And in fact, I'm not sure if it's now after the fact or while we were watching the film that I was thinking, I wonder what kind of sort of trust had to be established in the relationship and everything to enable the crew to film such a special moment. And you're saying that was like, hello, we're the film crew, and we're going to film this most important moment in your lives, basically.
Sure. Well, there are a few phone calls that happened before that very moment. We were lucky to be introduced to Rose by someone who she knew very well, which was Sasha Chanoff, who she worked with. And there was a lot of establishing trust on the phone to be able to film the reunion. When we filmed the reunion, no one was sure if it was going to become a feature-length documentary. So maybe Mapendo would have just used it on their website to show the power of reunification. The real sort of test of building trust came after that. And I think that there were a few things that we did from the onset that really helped. One was I went by myself for the first week of shooting. So I was very unintrusive. Mm-hmm. I stayed in the family's house. I would put the camera down and eat meals with them and learn how to roll fufu and learn about their culture and get to know them. And I think that because Rose had some notoriety before we came on the scene, and they had this big Phoenix commercial crew come in, and she had prepared a huge meal for them. And she said, sit down and enjoy this food. And they said, oh no, we're gonna go out to eat. We'll be back in an hour to finish filming it. So I think you have to be human before you're a filmmaker, no matter what kind of fourth wall you're creating. So then it became a evolution with Rose that we really explained to her that the reason why we wanted to make this film was that she is one woman and she can be in one place at a time. But if you have a film out there, her voice can be heard by thousands and thousands of people. And she is an activist at heart, so she really understood that and became very committed to the film.
And I only had one more question, and it very much relates to the theme that you're on right now, which is, I think that it's very important that the types of organizations that are assisting people in conflict are driven by people who've experienced the conflict, who've lived through it, and who also have some idea what the needs of the community are, because those are communities that they came from. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the two and nonprofits that she's founded and what their work consists of.
Sure. Well, it's interesting. When Rose was first resettled here, she became a part of Mapendo International, which their focus is to locate urban refugees and provide relief for them, and then also help sort of facilitate resettlement. And Rose worked as their ambassador for quite a few years, but she always had this nagging feeling of, the more and more she became acclimated to the United States, the more and more she just wanted to go back home and help her country and the Great Lakes region in general. So recently, about the time the film finished, Rose stepped down from Mapendo International, and she and her brother Kigabo, who was a medical doctor in Benin, but moved to the U.S. to help Rose out when she was resettled, and then got his master's in public health in the U.S., as English is his fourth language. They founded a new organization called Mapendo New Horizons. Mapendo New Horizons aims to use healthcare universal healthcare, this very new idea, universal healthcare, to help with reconciliation. So, for example, they're building a clinic in Kigali, in Rwanda, and offering free services to both Tutsis and Hutus, because there's such a competition for these things that even after the genocide in Rwanda, there's competition for safety, and simple things like healthcare. So now Rose's, and she also works a lot with women, sort of like you see in the film, kind of inspiring them to start their own businesses, to have conversations with their husbands about stopping fighting. So she feels really great about this move because she's able to concentrate on the people back where she came from. Great.
Anyone else have questions? I have more, but I'm restraining myself.
I'm wondering, after she met with that group of women, and they were so excited about what she was saying, what happened to them? And what have they done since?
That's a great question. One thing that we weren't able to get in the film, along with the other 250 hours that we shot, was Rose started a program with this group of women where she was able to start a bank account for them, which they never had. So she started a bank account and found matching donations from her church in America with any money that they made selling simple wares like rugs and pots and things like that. So actually this group of women has sort of started a small business kind of based on Rose's microloan, and they're doing well. Now they haven't been able to bring peace through talking to their husbands, but they have stayed together. Rose goes back and visits with them, and Rose is still able to find matching funds for any money that they make selling their crafts.
It seems to me that Rose and Wangari Maathai have a lot in common, not so much in their background and their life experience, but their vision of Africa, in which women have a more dignified and important role. Do they know each other? Do you know? Have they had any contact? Do they work together at all?
I don't know if they know each other yet, but I know because there's also a great Independent Lens film about her. So I know that we've talked about the Independent Lens folks and the PBS folks and people at my company have talked about having some summit of all these great women. So, yeah, if you have any way to make that happen, that would be great. Yeah, exactly.
In the president of Liberia,
Oh,
very
yeah.
much came into power. Evelyn
Right.
Shirley Johnson on the same type of wave for peace and the feeling that came out of the Mono River Women's Union, who was also nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, around the idea of how to build peace in that region.
And Rose, Abigail Disney, who is one of the filmmakers of Pray the Devil Back to Hell, actually had a dinner with some Nobel Peace Prize winning women. And I don't know if Wangari Maathai was there, but that would have been the time for her to meet. She invited Rose, so it was great. So hopefully, you just want all these people to be in one room, and you don't know what would come out of that conversation. But
Well, Vermont is a little short on refugee resettlement communities, I think. But SIT would be a great place to start that off.
Definitely.
Maybe, who knows?
We have a wonderful family from Mali, who I think the father is a professor at SIT, and the family is just like Rose's family. They're so close, and the mother is prepares African-style food and sells it at the farmer's market, and the sons are these wonderful, tall, handsome guys, and they plan trips to Mali, you know. So.
And I don't think much can be hurt by finding ways to make connections and extend invitations to those communities. I know in Amherst, Mass, there's been some work like that with the Tibetan community, and there's a good community of war refugees there, people who've come through that. And very much refugee communities oftentimes are resettled in groups in mass. So like before the Clinton era, very much both of the coasts would have heavy concentrations of refugee communities, and then he signed a resettlement act that very much spread that out, and that's why you see a community like Phoenix or Denver, Salt Lake, Lincoln, Nebraska, getting refugee communities. And part of the impetus behind that movement in that law was very much to help resettle people where they could build networks of support and where the communities weren't overstrained. So yeah, I think that it's worth looking into ways that a place like Brattleboro would be a wonderful home for some new families.
definitely. And in Burlington, yeah.
Has a big Sudanese community, no? The
Yep.
Sudanese refugees.
And Somalian refugees are very heavily settled in Springfield, which is about Springfield, Mass, about an hour and a half from here.
The film about Wangari Maathai was made by Alan Dater and Lisa Merton, no? Who were here in Brattleboro.
Oh, really?
Yeah, they
Yeah.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah.
They live in Marlboro.
Interesting.
Yeah, in Marlboro, right.
Yeah.
And it's the
Exactly
same
that.
company.
Well, that's great. We can say that one outcome of this screening was we started creating a summit of really powerful women.
Just let us know when you want us to host that.
Yeah, I'll keep you posted.
But she's worked with the women over in the Congo and so on and around. What are the men's responses to these women that are getting uppity, as it were, in their fight?
Well, it's interesting. We just had a screening at USAID in DC earlier this week, actually, and they are looking at ways to use the film in their missions in different areas, in different countries in Africa. But that was a big part of our conversation. Was actually we need to start focusing a bit more on the men. There are some great organizations that focus on using men to combat women being used as weapons of war and things like that. Rose, in my experience, I've only experienced a few examples of the men in her community. One is Rose's family. The men in her community embrace her power with open arms, which is a testament to Rose's parents and how they were all raised. But Rose has also showed the film to some of the pastors in her community who are essentially the leaders of her ethnic group, the Banyamulenge. And though I think it is revolutionary for them, they think so highly of Rose that she's the right person to be bringing this message. One thing that we're trying to do is bring the film to Congo. So I think that I think we'll have to keep you posted on how that's received. But we hope to have small group screenings with facilitators, and that some of our best screenings have been screenings where there have been Congolese women there. And even if they're full of arguing at the beginning, there's this great transformation that's happened with Rose and women who might not think much of her ethnic group. And it comes out with open arms and photos and hugs. So I'm hoping that similar things could happen if facilitated in the right way with the men in her community.
Are any of her children interested in following in her footsteps, like John or some of the men in her family?
Yeah, they're all. John is in school for pharmacy, to be a pharmacist, and so he really cares about helping people. I think he also feels like he has to take care of the family, so he's pursuing pharmacy. Nangabire wants to become a nurse and has expressed interest in helping back in the clinics that Rose's organization creates. So definitely her whole family feels very passionately about bringing peace and about helping people. So.
And I think I would just say from the African men and women who I've known, in the U.S. we often think of pursuing a profession and that being the singular focus of our energies and our time. But I've had the experience where people will be authors, poets, youth leaders, and also, also have another sideline on top of that, like a car dealership or something, like very dispersed ways of doing things that maybe don't fit into our traditional American sense. Oh, you follow this path and you go straight forward, where things weave in and out more of each other. And that is also true, I think, with that helping approaches that you see, like you're noticing that there's this big health focus as a means to peace. And so where the things are weaving in and out of each other in a way maybe we wouldn't have anticipated if we'd founded the NGO ourselves. Yeah.
Well, and the good news on that note is that when we were at this USAID screening, and there are people from the State Department there, a lot of people were saying, we've tried to bring reconciliation and peace to areas and we don't know why it's not working. And I mean, what do we as filmmakers know? Not a lot. But one thing about bringing reconciliation to Congo, but one thing we can say is, well, you better involve the local leaders in whatever sort of program you come up with. And so I do think that there's, and IVAWA, the International Violence Against Women Act, did prioritize working with local leaders, especially women leaders, to help the reconciliation process in countries. So hopefully there will be a shift in how our government does things abroad, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
In my experience, I wrote my dissertation on child soldiering and the way that it spread across the border from Liberia to Sierra Leone, and then the way that some community capacities in northern Namibia slowed down the spread of child abduction as it started to come over the border. And in my experience, it was very much the local capacities and what the local leaders did at the moment, and also the types of linkages that those local leaders had to either regional police or regional government officials, the way that they were able to work through some of those chains. And so, I mean, I think for an organization like USAID, helping strengthen those pieces of connection and the responsiveness in those connections is also a way so that people, regardless of what ethnic group they were from, could work their way through through justice processes, through the series of processes that people come in contact, the education system or so forth, in the course of their daily life. And I think that role of reconciliation can also be supported when the bad actors are being treated by some sort of justice system and not just the International Criminal Court, which on its own can't govern the world. So strengthening those.
Religious establishments playing any role in this reconciliation? Is she herself felt like the other was Christian, but I didn't get the sense that she was working within the Christian church establishment. Whatever, it seems there's a wonderful role for the church to play, but is it doing it? Are there factions between different denominations and so forth? And Congo's Catholic, isn't it, primarily?
Yes, Congo is Catholic, and actually Rose's community is Pentecostal, and that's just whichever missionaries went where and when. I think that, yes, religion can be a very powerful tool in reconciliation, but I think it's also complicated. In Rose's case, she has been able to mobilize, so she has 2 churches in Phoenix. She has what she calls African Church, which is where a lot of refugees go, and it's very African service, which is about 5 hours long, and it's great, but it's very long. And then she goes to, what we would consider maybe a mega church in Phoenix, just like a very big American church. And she has mobilized that American church to really help with fundraising and help with things like that. I don't know if you can speak a bit about the role of...
In my experience in southern Angola, there was a point in the conflict there in, I think it was about 1999. There had been a ceasefire, and it was looking like there was going to be a peace agreement, and then that fell apart, and there was a reemergence of hostilities. And at that point, the government put out a call and said, okay, we're going to be recruiting all young boys and men, turn out and register. And the Catholic Church, together with some regional and local women's organizations, took out radio announcements and said, boys, head for the borders, get out of town, basically, and sent out both a moral and a motherly message, let's say, to those communities to say,
Angola?
Yeah, in southern Angola, yeah.
As you speak, you also just remind me of another. Rose, a few years back, there was a peace conference in Goma, and Rose went to that, and though it was an amazing experience, unfortunately, it didn't result in a ceasefire or anything. A few months ago, Kigabo, Rose's brother, went to a meeting of mainly pastors from different groups in Congo, where they basically sat down and said, this is crazy, none of us are benefiting. How can we stop this? And actually, it did result in a rebel group saying, we're gonna put down our guns as long as you don't do this one thing. And according to Kigabo, he thinks one of the reasons why that was more powerful was, one, it came from the ground up, but 2, there were a lot of pastors involved, so they had a common meeting ground, which was religion. So.
Yeah. No, and that's Ellen Shirley Johnson's base also is partly in the church. So, yeah.
We're going to have to wrap up, and I'm going to encourage anyone who wants to hang around and chat a little more individually, please feel free to do so. I wanted to thank you both so much. This has been a fascinating discussion, and I especially want to thank you, Beth, for making this incredible film. And in particular, as a filmmaker, you enter into a situation and there are a lot of different ways you can go and a lot of different stories you can tell, and to the extent that you've really highlighted this incredibly powerful message that Rose is putting out there, that the way to really make change in these, where there's systemic, seemingly never-ending violence, is to let it go and forgive and not just follow that path of vengeance. I think that's such an incredibly powerful message, and I'm grateful that that's the message you really highlighted. So thank you for your film.
Thank you.
I appreciate it. And Bridget, thank you so much.